Thanks for joining me on the Leading Safely podcast, Kelvin. It's great to finally almost meet you in the flesh, considering how big you are in the safety space.
Thank you. It's really nice to meet you too.
That's okay. So as you know, I like to ask all of my special guests 4 health and safety related questions. And the first one, is highly relevant to you and the work that you've done in the leadership and safety leadership space. So what do you think makes an effective leader when it comes to health and safety?
Interesting question. It's been, I suppose, a question central to safety. Probably it wasn't originally so when we sort of started our journey of safety changing into a new space. And I'm going back 30, 40 years. It wasn't a topic at all. It emerged as a topic. Really, it started around the mid-90s and early 2000s, and a lot of it evolved probably from DuPont in that space, really challenging managers that they have to have this notion of safety leadership and the ideas of what you walk past is what you accept, was the domain. And in following that feed, it then sort of followed a track where we started teaching everyone that they had to be a safety leader. And so we started from leaders and we ended up that everyone who worked had become a leader in one form or another. And so it's interesting in that space when I think about leadership, my first position on leadership is there should be no safety leadership in an organisation. Yeah, I know that's been controversial.
Yeah, I got it.
But the reason for that is if you have silos of leadership. So okay, I'm over here now, I'm doing production, or now I'm doing this, and when I'm doing that activity, there's a set of ways that I have to work and think, and something else. I've got a safety thing, I'll put my safety. And now what were the safety leadership things that I have to do?
Yeah.
So my first point about leadership is it's about leadership, about how the organisation engages and works with the people. That's the important thing. It's a construct, and particularly, I come from the humble leadership model in that space. Is the last thing you want is to be the demonstrative leader on the horse charging to battle, follow me in that space. That's a failed model completely in the way that we think about that. So my first point is not to do safety leadership, but the substitute to that is actually having really substantial, credible leadership in an organisation is potential. And you'll know, Georgie, from your own work in psychological safety, that really depends on really well-functioning leadership and management who have empathy and engagement and listen. So that's the safety skills that you need, And so when we talk about leadership, and I suppose I talk a lot about that, we talk about enabling leadership as a concept, sorry. And that has probably 3 sort of central ideas. The first one is to engage, and I'll put this up on the screen so I can show what I'm talking to.
Sure.
And just confirm if you've got that up.
It is presenting. Yep.
Yeah. So these are the 3 ideas when we think about, so when you look at this, there's nothing safety about this at all. This is about repositioning yourself. Now, if you're in an organisation, if you think acting as a safety professional in this space, these are navigation points to think about. Is firstly, and I think the core thing to have safety working really well, particularly as an expert, as a subject matter expert in safety, is to be curious. Is to come from a point of curiosity in that space. And that is stepping back with all the baggage and knowledge and everything you think about how everything should be done. It's stepping completely away from that policing mode. This is about suspending judgment and your expertise and listening. But I know when something's not going to go well, if you start up an investigation and your lead investigator has just been notified of this event that's happened and comes to you and says, it's all good, I know what caused it. You know, so they haven't talked to anyone.
Yeah.
Anything, right? So for me, that question of leadership is about active curiosity and having empathy. And the real trick to this is you have to stand in people's shoes to understand why things make sense to them. And once you do that, you can actually learn and understand how to help them in that space. So then the next sort of core tenet that we think about is about enabling. I really think about, safety is great at complexity. We seem to get better and better at making things more complex, but it's really about thinking about how do we actually get people to understand what they need to do, solve problems. How do we give them the right knowledge to make good decisions? How do they solve problems in that space? How do they share with each other in real time? And how do you constantly have a collaborative, communicative environment that's in space? So leadership is about enabling those things to occur. And the third part of leadership, I think we don't understand this at all in safety. We talk about responsibility and accountability all the time.
Yeah.
And it's nearly like we think about it as the person doing the work has to be accountable for what they do. So they need to be accountable for the procedures. We don't talk about the person who designs the work method or the person who makes the resourcing decisions about why they haven't got enough labour to do the work that they need to do with the time objectives that have been set, why we made purchasing decisions that actually gave them inferior equipment to work with to do that work. This notion of leadership is you all have to engage and have shared responsibility and accountability to actually understand and be vulnerable in that space to understand that there's all these decisions made for lots of reasons, but if it doesn't work, own it and let's contribute to it and work out collaboratively back how to solve the problems. So I hope I've stepped nicely around the question of leadership.
You could almost be a politician, I think, Kelvin, with that kind of answer. No, that was great, and I almost felt like I was back in safety leadership with Sydney hearing those. I wonder how that seems to sound very familiar. I do have a question. You spoke about accountability and responsibility, and there was during the safety leadership grad cert last year. Of course, Sydney spoke about accountability on numerous occasions and the blame kind of, moving away from that blame space. And I remember him saying about, accounts being something you pay and settle, but also there's this notion of we can't or can we hold someone accountable. For me, accountability is not like a skill that you can learn. It's something you either have or you don't have. Like, what's your view on accountability? Is it something...
And Sydney also talks about who gets to hold someone accountable.
Correct.
And that question is often very difficult to answer. If you want to go into that mode, and sometimes we talk about, well, maybe it's a collection of peers, for example, to make judgment in that space or things like that. But even that can have its own problems. That's a very interesting question to try to answer. I think in the end, and particularly Sydney and I have done a lot of work, and we've done obviously a lot of masterclasses in this space. The question of just culture and those things. But I suppose really what I found is nobody intentionally really does things wrong. There's lots of factors that come into play. But the question about accountability is when something doesn't go right and you're a part of that, how do you engage and actually be part of moving forward and solving the problems? That to me is accountability. And that's at every part of the transaction in that space.
And that does speak to that, moving away from just a just culture piece, right?
Look, Sydney, we've had this discussion many times. Just culture, where I see it in organisations all the time, has really been reframed to being a framework of justice and completely moved away from the original tenets of just culture. So that's why Sydney reframed it as restorative just culture. Because it now gets used as a term that's forgotten its meaning and roots.
Yeah, no, definitely. And that kind of nicely ties into the second question. So no doubt in your time in your career, you've come across people, whether it be, clients that are really stuck in that traditional, safety or compliance model, or just in general, people who don't want to move along in their safety journey. What kind of tactics or strategies, would you give advice to people to help them get those people to move along?
And I've been on a journey with many lessons learned.
Okay.
The first of those is you never go in and cut something down saying you're doing all this wrong. It's more about going and acknowledging and recognising the work that's been done to get people to where they are that may not have got them where they desired to be in that space. So my first message to everyone is always go in and acknowledge and value the contribution work. So if you go into where you can see this is a nightmare of safety one just gone wrong, there's no point going in and telling people that in that space.
Yeah.
What you need to do is find the things that work within that model and amplify those, and then it gives you the opportunity to maybe share and look where there might be a different path or a more productive part in the areas that aren't working well. But get people to go on a journey of self-discovery with some facilitated guidance in that space. Sharing some insights, some examples of how things have worked in another space. So to me, it's about partnering, collaborating, and taking people there rather than coming in and saying, well, we're going to reforestate the world in a new species.
Yeah, that's true. It's a bit like how I tell people you can't come in, with the Sydney Decker flags or flying past and hope that they're going to forward.
Look, it's interesting because I think one of the really good things and one of the really damaging things, all in the same process with Eric Holnagel's work around Safety 1 and Safety 2, has been the dichotomy discussion. And that forced this whole thing around, you're Safety 1 or we're Safety 2, and that whole notion is a complete fallacy. Eric only positioned that there to actually give some ideas of the different points of reference in that space. So in a safety differently world, what we would say is Safety 2 and Safety Differently is about trying to acknowledge and what works well, given the nature of the organisation called where there are a whole range of things in that space. And it's about challenging the assumptions, but then, either keeping something going that's working well. So you might have something really Safety 1 that is going, but it works in that environment at that time. So that is still a Safety 2 thing. It's the process of actually, it's not about saying, you can't do that because that's a Safety 1 thing. You need to do a Safety 2 thing.
Yeah, it's not this or that. It's
no. I'm completely against the dichotomy discussion.
That's nice to hear. And then the third question is always one that I'm curious to hear people's answers to, and that's if you had all the money and all the resources in the world and could create something to solve a workplace health and safety issue, other than your masterclasses that you have run, what would you invent and why would you invent it?
I think I mentioned before that I asked AI some questions. So AI did come up with an answer to this.
Okay.
Basically, it says it was going to invent a personalised wearable exosuit. So,
really? Okay.
Yeah, and so that exosuit would then, in essence, solve. Firstly, give you it would monitor, have all the biofeedback about physically about the health state of the individual and what they needed to do and all those things, but it also would solve all of the manual handling, musculoskeletal things in that space. So I thought, okay, well, that's a nice one. But if I was going to take my perspective on it, it would be something I'm not sure how to invent, but it would be something that changes the landscape of the way that we interact with each other in the workplace. So it is about empathy and understanding and trust and building, valued contribution and having something that will sponsor that. So I don't know, maybe it's some controlling, a computer system that communicates to us all, and it gets us to actually work harmoniously. Yeah. But I think, if you could do something in that space, it would be about trying to change the nature of the way we work together.
Oh, isn't that funny? What's the name of your consultancy firm again? Isn't that what you're referring to, really, by that answer?
Well, yes, actually, and the fact that you made that connection, I didn't even think about it then, but it is. That's interesting.
Yeah.
There is. I'm obviously, subconsciously connected.
100%, right? Like, and I suppose that is, at the bearing of perhaps why you started it, or like what your messaging is with the business, and who you are as a safety professional as well, right? It's around that space, trying to create that harmonious environment, have people performing and working, etc. And then the last question is, if you could go back to your younger self and that younger point in time before you started out on your career journey and got you to where you are today, what would you say to yourself, the younger version of Kelvin, to help you thrive and survive?
Well, I think, it's interesting. When I started my career, there's a couple of things that happened in space, but my position of certainty, about what was wrong and what needed to be fixed and how to fix it, and just talk to me and you can, and it will be fixed.
Yeah.
That's what I would go back and say. And I've learned, the more I've learned, the more I know, the more I realise that I know less and less all the time. And so in going back to my younger self, who were definitely there about trying to understand the notion of curiosity, right? And that everyone has something to contribute and learn how you can gain that knowledge in that space. The second thing that it took me a long time to learn was the importance of continuous learning for yourself. I really, finished uni and thought I'd done enough of that. Disconnected. I didn't read any journals or anything, all that sort of thing. That was just something you had to do to tick your box and get started. And really, it was the internet and YouTube and these things that really enabled this view of continuous learning, and particularly go and learn stuff that's outside of your professional domain. So I think all safety people should stop learning safety stuff.
Yep.
And they should go and explore all sorts of domains, whether it's in the people space or the engineering space, or or the innovation space. Or that's why I really fell into human-centered design, which is now a deep passion of mine, which I think all safety should be built on. It came through this curious learning approach. So going back to my younger self, I should have done a lot more of that a lot earlier.
That's great. And I agree with you. I think that we do need to broaden our horizons, like read broadly, go to as many courses, conferences that are outside of the safety space.
Yeah, I nearly think if we have a safety conference, there shouldn't be any safety people there. Right? So that should only be other people trying to broaden their horizons.
No.
All the safety people should be at all the other conferences. Learning all the other stuff.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm trying to think, I often sign up for the Australian Institute of Management, and I go along to their 1 day or 2 day courses in different things like.
I've gone to quite a number of TEDx.
Oh yeah, yep.
And that's where that's my favourite thing to do. If I could afford to throw the money to go to TED, I would. But that type of thing, I love to go there because it takes you in all these areas you wouldn't have thought of exploring. Yep. A number of the ideas that we use in safety differently emerge from TED.
Yeah. Well, that's a nice secret you've just released.
Yeah. No, I don't think it's a secret though.
Yeah. Thanks, Ted, for that part. Hey, I don't remember seeing any credits in any of the books.
Dan Pink. We talk about Dan Pink a lot, and
that's true. Yes.
Yeah. So that came from TED.
Yeah. No, that's perfect. And now I understand, obviously, you've done a lot of work, and you are still currently doing some work in the topic of critical risk and the whole, major space that is a hot topic at the moment. What would you like to share with my listeners around that space while your picture of disdain is written all over your face right now?
I actively resisted the whole critical risk and the the fatality and severity risk models when it all really emerged from BHP. Late 90s, early 2000s. So this model, it was picked up by the mining sector. For the Minings and Minerals Council, really got into it from about 2008 to 2012. They started to really build this, and everyone's jumped on board in this space. And so I've come around to it because what I do like about it is it does actually focus on the important things. We got tripped up, no pun intended, on slips, trips, and falls, and all the nonsense in safety, which was not doing anything productive for safety. So in that idea, so I think that's been good in that space. The problem was, in doing this, we've forgotten the fundamental science of safety science and what we do. So we did a lot of, and we actually started doing this work with BHP. Originally, we've done it with a lot of organisations, defence and everywhere else, is thinking about the space. The question is about if we've got critical hazards, if you like, and we want to then deploy controls into that space. The question is, how do we know those controls are effective, appropriate? Do they have unintended consequences for the users of them? We impose them upon workplaces that actually make the work more difficult, or may make it unsafe in another dimension, as such, in that space. So part of us going back to the fundamental science, and we reinvested and rethought about the hierarchy of controls. We thought about the energy damage model in particular, so we went and re-engineered these things together. So we really thought it's really important to use the energy damage model to really understand the nature of hazards in the first place, what hazards are you dealing with, and understand the nature of energy values in that space. The whole process is, if you remove the energy value, you've no longer got the hazard in play. But because of a lot of safety people have lost that fundamental, if you like, critical thinking in the physics space around safety, we've drifted into topics rather than these things. So we re onto it. So what we then started to do, and then we thought, well, and the other component around this is understanding human factors and the organisational factors that are really important. And the critical part in this process was that if we want to understand controls and the hierarchy, firstly we have to understand that the hierarchy of controls are not independent of each other.
Yep.
Right? So if you have an engineering control, how that control is designed it may have a high degree of dependency on human interaction, or it may have a low degree of independency, but it becomes more reliable the less dependency it's got on a person in that space. So we started to design this model and to really think about a control in 4 domains. Firstly, the robustness of the control. So in that, what we're trying to do is increase the level of the hierarchy and then decrease the level of human dependency in that space. And where there is human dependencies, understand clearly what those dependencies are, and then the tactics we actually need to make them sustainable and reliable as such. So that basically, we end up, we've got a system of actually analysing that and rating it as a process. And then the human dependency piece in this is then trying to understand a couple of things about controls. Firstly is the user experience model. So we're using user experience design thinking in this space, where we go and test the controls with the people who use the controls to understand them. Do they make sense? Are they usable? Are they findable? Are they desirable? Because it might be a nonsense control that we're using, but compared to somewhere else that does something better in that space, is actually get feedback from the end users about how the controls are used by them. And then how dependent on them. These controls rely upon not being fatigued, for example, being alert, all of these factors in this space. So then factoring that. So in this space, if I take the robustness one, that's a subject matter expert piece where we get engineers and those sort of piece. This one is divided, the user experience is from the users, and the human factors again is from subject matter experts in that space. And then the next thing we test is the alignment of the control. So what we want to know is from the user of that control and in the field is, does this control make it easier or harder to do the job? and then does it make it easier or harder to actually complete the overall task that's been completed? So this is the productive outcome that you're looking at in that space. And then finally, we want to know in that space is how adaptable to change is the control. So does it respond to changing conditions? And there's all sorts of things that come in. This is where, when we have failures in the space, the problem is it's about changing conditions, and how we respond to that space. And then when something does fail in that space, how recoverable is it? Can you recover easily? So what we end up in this tool, in this way of thinking, is we're now combining subject matter experts to contribute knowledge and expertise, but we're providing feedback from the end users to that space to the subject matter experts, so you can get better design outcomes in the process, both in terms of, it may be the capital decisions you're making, but also the support, the operational decisions that you need to make to support those controls. And so what you get back out of this is an effectiveness rating that combines a technical construct to the tool and then an operational construct. Now, where we've deployed this, it's really interesting. The data that you get back from this approach is that the same control in the same organisation can give you completely different results in different parts of the organisation. So in a mining company that we did, for example, we tested one in an Australian environment, and the control worked really well in that space. And then we took it to South America, and it worked really badly in that space. And it was quite a technical control, but it came out that technical control didn't have the technical support to actually function in that other location that it needed in that space. So this is now, if we take our traditional thinking about critical controls, we have a group of subject matter experts who do a bow tie. They sit in an isolated room once every couple of years, and go and say, "Oh, well, here's the problem here. Everyone will just have to do this, this, and this." There's no discussion, and then we'll design audit and checklists. So we'll have an assurance process, and we'll go out in the field and we'll check whether they're doing it. So our measures of critical control effectiveness are whether really a hierarchical model of telling people how they need to do things is being done and complied with. It's not testing whether the controls actually function or work. And it's interesting because in the investigation models, it's really interesting when you go back and use this model of testing your controls as to seeing what data that you get back, as opposed to the investigation, were the controls in place or not, yes or no.
Yeah. It allows for variability, which the current investigational models don't really allow for.
No.
In effectiveness, like testing the effectiveness specifically, but also building it out, right? Because if you can fill it into those four, I don't know what you're calling them, quadrants or whatever.
Yeah, quadrants. You end up, basically each of these quadrants just has a score between 1 and 5. And then it ends up with a score out of 20 as such. But it breaks us down into each of the subsections within the quadrants. You can actually get rated data on. But the center of this is human-centered design. Is the fundamental tool. So there's nothing new in this tool. It's going back to some thinking, that the design thinking work, out of Stanford University, that is what Apple and everyone else has been built upon, is saying, why isn't safety doing that?
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. What have you called it? What's the model called?
This is just our control effectiveness. So it's CPAT is what we call Control Performance Assessment Tool.
Fantastic.
And it's if you want its branded name, it's ResiliMap.
Oh, okay. So this is the ResiliMap. That's fantastic. Obviously, there's more to it. There is more. Like, I'm sure you build them a report. There's a whole heap of other things. I'm just because I've got a small period of time. I'm just giving you. No, that's great. I know that you are flat strapped for work at the moment, but if there was anyone listening that wanted to get some more information or perhaps do some do you offer training in ResiliMap?
No, we've got that because we've got the academy.
Yes.
So we've got a whole range of programs. We've got the enabling leadership programs. We've got the control effectiveness. We do obviously safety differently with Sydney and all those things. So so they're welcome to go and look at the academy if there's stuff that they want. If it hasn't been programmed, get in contact and we'll organise it.
Fantastic. And where do they go for that? Is that just your website?
Just Google Art of Work. Yeah, you can just Google Art of Work and go to a website or Art of Work Academy.
Yep.
You'll find it.
On
The
the
website for both, yeah.
Not that you need extra work, but just in case.
I know we love talking to people, particularly if people want to explore and try new ideas. We love to help them out.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I'm sure that the listeners would have got some valuable insights from that, or at least something that may have triggered some inspiration or critical thought around the safety space. So